In this module, we shall learn about goods market equilibrium. The goods market is in equilibrium when aggregate demand is equals to income. The aggregate demand is determined by consumption demand and investment demand. In the Keynesian model of goods market equilibrium, we also introduce the rate of interest as an important determinant of investment. With this introduction of interest as a determinant of investment, the latter now becomes an endogenous variable in the model. When the rate of interest falls, the level of investment increases and vice versa. Thus, changes in the rate of interest affect the aggregate demand or aggregate expenditure by causing changes in the investment demand. When the rate of interest falls, it lowers the cost of investment projects and thereby it raises the profitability of investment. The businessman will therefore undertake greater investment at a lower rate of interest. The increase in investment demand will bring about increase in aggregate demand, which in turn will raise the equilibrium level of income. In the derivation of the IS curve, we seek to find out the equilibrium level of national income as determined by the equilibrium in the goods market by a level of investment determined by a given rate of interest. The goods market equilibrium is represented by the IS curve, which shows the different combinations of output, level and interest rate. This equilibrium will be determined on the extended version of the Keynesian theory of income determination with the aggregate expenditure model. In the aggregate expenditure model, investment is assumed to be autonomous, while in this goods market equilibrium determination, investment is treated as a function of rate of interest. It relates the level of investment in the economy with the prevailing market rate of interest. IS curve is derived from the aggregate expenditure curve when it shifts as a result of the change in interest rate. Multiplier, which determines the slope of aggregate expenditure curve, also explains the slope of IS curve in addition to the interest rate sensitivity. Only those points which are on the IS curve represents equilibrium in the goods market, and points off the IS curve are the points of excess demand and excess supply in the goods market. After studying this module, you shall be able to know the meaning of equilibrium in goods market, learn about the derivation of IS curve, identify what causes the IS curve to shift, evaluate the determinants of the slope of IS curve, analyze the meaning of positions to the right and left of IS curve. Let us begin by understanding goods market equilibrium. Goods market equilibrium is established where the planned spending is equal to income. The goods market equilibrium is an extension of simple AE is equals to Y model with a 45-degree line. The components of AE includes AE is equals to C plus I plus G. In this analysis, it is assumed that a part of consumption, whole investment, transfer payments by government and government spending constitute autonomous spending. When the functions are inserted in AE equation, we get AE is equals to C plus I plus G, AE is equals to A plus BYD plus I plus G. I is the autonomous investment, G is the autonomous government spending, and YD is the disposable income left after taxes and transfers have been adjusted in the income. YD is equals to Y minus TY plus TR, where TY shows the proportion of income that is taxed and TR is the transfers made by the government to the individuals. By equating AE to Y and using disposable income in the consumption function, we get Y is equals to A bar by 1 minus B into 1 minus T, where A bar includes A plus B TR plus I plus G, which is the sum of autonomous consumption, investment, transfer payments, and government spending. The term 1 by 1 minus b into 1 minus t is the multiplier whose value is determined by propensity to consume out of disposable income, that is b into 1 minus t. The goods market equilibrium is established by relaxing the assumption that investment is autonomous. It is no longer autonomous but a function of interest rate. It shares a negative relation with the interest rate. The IS curve, which shows different combinations of output and interest rate, is the representation of goods market equilibrium. Moving on to investment. Investment in reality is influenced by many factors, including rate of interest, business confidence, expectations, forecast, etc. In this simple Keynesian model, investment is assumed to be autonomous. That means it is unaffected by changes in any of the factors, including interest rate and income. It is assumed to be exogenously given, thus, it remains constant. The autonomous investment function takes the form as shown in the figure. Further, we have desired investment spending, which is interest determined. Investment spending is one of the important constituent of aggregate expenditure in the economy. The most basic and important determinant influencing the level of investment spending is the real interest rate. Higher the real interest rate, the more costly it becomes to borrow money for investment purposes, and lower is the desired investment spending, other things remaining constant. Apart from real interest rate, there are other factors also which influence investment spending, like business expectations, economic fluctuations, yields to investment as measured with marginal efficiency of capital, etc. But unlike real interest rate, these factors are difficult to monitor and thus are uncertain. The inverse relationship between investment spending and the real interest rate can be easily understood by disaggregating investment spending done by households and firms under the following three heads. First, residential housing construction. Second, inventory accumulation. Third, fixed capital formation. First, we have residential housing construction. Spending on residential housing constitutes a major chunk of aggregate expenditure and has a large impact on the economy. It must, however, be noted that spending only on new houses, not just the transfer of ownership titles of the existing properties of houses, impacts GDP. Generally, spending on residential houses is done using borrowed funds from the market. If the interest rate is high, the cost of borrowing goes up and there will be less demand for investment in residential housing construction. So, this justifies the inverse relation between interest rate and investment spending. Moving on to the inventory accumulation, some amount of investment of firms remains tied up in the form of change in stock of raw materials, finished goods, and unfinished goods. If the same investment is done in some other productive venture, like lending the same amount at the market rate of interest, it will earn some money. It means that inventory accumulation has an opportunity cost, which is the interest that is foregone. So, the level of desired investment spending will vary inversely with the real interest rate. And lastly, we have fixed capital formation. Majority of investment spending by business firms is in the form of purchase of fixed capital, including factories, machines, buildings, etc. These investments by business firms are financed either through profits or borrowed funds. Generally, firms rely more on borrowed funds for their fixed capital investments. Thus, interest rate is a major determinant of investment spending. A higher interest rate discourages borrowings as the cost of borrowing rises and thus rate of fixed capital formation falls in the economy. So, investment is an increase in the capital stock such as buying a factory or machine, or in simple words, it is the addition to the productive capacity. The decision of firms and individuals about how much investment to make depends on interest rates. Whenever an entrepreneur decides to invest in a capital good, he either borrows funds from the market for which he has to pay the market rate of interest, or uses his own resources to finance the investment for which he sacrifices the interest rate which he could have earned on by lending his funds. So, the rate of interest is the price of investment. A higher price in the form of high interest rate will discourage investment. Thus, investment spending function is I is equals to I bar minus BI, where I bar is the autonomous investment. In this investment function, investment is affected by the rate of interest, that is I. A higher interest rate lowers the planned investment. The coefficient B measures the interest rate sensitivity of investment. It measures how much responsive investment is to the rate of interest. The investment schedule is determined by the autonomous investment, and term B is the slope of investment curve. The investment is said to be autonomous if the amount of investment is unaffected by the level of income or the market rate of interest. This investment depends upon certain socio-economic and political factors. Investment is not autonomous in reality, but it is determined by interest rate. A higher interest rate responsiveness implies that a small decline in interest rate will lead to a large increase in investment, and investment curve would be very flat. When the value of B is small, it will result in steeper investment curve. An investment function is shown in the figure. It is downward sloping, indicating a negative relation between investment and interest rate. A fall in interest rate will raise investment and will be shown as a movement along the investment curve, while an increase or decrease in autonomous investment will cause the investment curve to shift right or left. Let us now move on to derive the IS curve. In the aggregate demand function, AE is equals to C plus I plus G. When we introduce the investment function, which is a function of interest rate, we get the following. AE is equals to C plus I bar minus BI plus G. Putting the consumption function and equating AE to Y, we get Y is equals to A bar minus BI divided by 1 minus B into 1 minus T. A bar is the sum of autonomous components. Now the intercept of AE curve is determined not only by A bar but A bar plus BI. Thus, any change in interest rate will shift the AE curve through its effect on the level of investment. If there is a fall in interest rate, that will lead to a rise in investment spending and shift the AE curve upwards, which will in turn raise the level of equilibrium output and income. When the corresponding points of equilibrium income and interest rate are plotted in interest income plane, we get the IS curve. Let us now derive IS curve graphically. In panel A of the initial equilibrium in the economy is at point E0, where AE is equals to Y and rate of interest is R0 and equilibrium level of income is Y0. In panel B, the point corresponding to E0 is recorded as point A, where interest rate is R0 and income at Y0. Now, when the interest rate falls from R0 to R1, investment spending rises and leads to an upward shift of AE curve. New equilibrium is established at point E1 where equilibrium income is at Y1. The point corresponding to this new equilibrium is point B at interest R1 and Y1. When points A and B are joined, we obtain the IS curve. Thus, IS curve is the combination of interest rates and income at which the goods market clears. All points on the IS curve represent the goods market equilibrium. IS curve is negatively sloped as a lower interest rate corresponds a higher aggregate expenditure. This condition of goods market equilibrium can also be represented in the form of IS curve equation. Y is equals to A bar minus BI divided by 1 minus B into 1 minus T, or Y is equals to alpha G into A bar minus BI, where alpha G is equals to 1 by 1 minus B into 1 minus T. Further, let us look at the shift in the IS curve. The shift in the IS curve is the result of change in any component of autonomous spending. Whenever a change in autonomous spending like government expenditure or autonomous expenditure leads to a change in the equilibrium level of income, this increase is reflected as a shift of the IS curve at the same rate of interest. Let us look at the shift in IS curve graphically. Suppose the AE curve shifts upward as a result of increase in government spending. This change will lead to an increase in equilibrium level of output and income. This is shown in the figure. When autonomous government expenditure rises, AE curves shift upward to AE1 and equilibrium level of income rises to Y1 at the interest rate R. As a result of this, IS curve shifts rightward in panel B of the figure. At R rate of interest, equilibrium income is now higher. The magnitude of the horizontal shift in IS curve is equal to multiplier times the change in autonomous government spending. In contrast, whenever there is a decrease in any autonomous component of AE, this will lower the equilibrium level of income at each interest rate and leads to a leftward shift of IS curve. Moving on to the slope of IS curve. The IS curve is negatively sloped because a higher interest rate induces a lower investment spending, thereby leading to a fall in aggregate expenditure and equilibrium level of income. The slope of IS curve, that is how flat or steep it is, depends upon two things. First, interest rate sensitivity of investment, that is B, and second, multiplier. Let us look at the first factor, interest rate sensitivity of investment, given by B. The coefficient B in the investment function measures the interest responsiveness of investment spending. When investment is very sensitive to interest rate changes, that is, when B is high, a small change in interest rate brings about large change in the aggregate spending, reflected in a large shift in aggregate expenditure curve. This large shift in AE correspondingly brings about a large change in income. In such a case, AE curve is steep and IS curve is very flat. This is because a given change in interest rate produces large change in income. If the value of B is less, that is, less responsiveness of investment to interest rate, AE curve will be flatter and IS curve will be relatively steeper. This is because now a large change in interest rate is required in order to influence spending. The second factor is the multiplier, that is alpha G. The steepness or flatness of AE curve is determined by the size of multiplier, which is in turn determined by A. Marginal propensity to consume, and B. Tax rate. A. Marginal propensity to consume. An increase in the marginal propensity to consume creates a steeper aggregate expenditure curve. A higher marginal propensity to consume implies larger multiplier and a steeper aggregate expenditure curves, with which it becomes apparent that the IS curve is flatter. Moving on to the tax rate. An increase in the tax rate reduces the slope of the aggregate expenditure curve by lowering the size of the multiplier. The flatter aggregate expenditure curves produces an IS curve that is steeper. When the multiplier is large, a change in equilibrium income corresponding to a given change in interest rate will be larger as aggregate expenditure curve is steeper. This large value of multiplier corresponds to a flat IS curve. This analysis implies that the smaller the sensitivity of investment spending to the interest rate, the smaller the multiplier, the steeper the IS curve. When the multiplier is large, a change in equilibrium income corresponding to a given change in interest rate will be larger as aggregate expenditure curve is steeper. This large value of multiplier corresponds to a flat IS curve. This analysis implies that the smaller the sensitivity of investment spending to the interest rate, the smaller the multiplier, the steeper the IS curve. In the figure, consider the points of the IS curve. In the figure, points A and B on the IS curve are the points of goods market equilibrium. If we compare point A to point D, at point A, the level of income is the same as at point D, but the interest rate is lower. Therefore, the demand for investment is higher than at point A and the demand for goods is higher than at A. This means that demand for goods exceeds the level of output, so there is an excess demand for goods. Similarly, at point C and point B, income level is the same at Y1, but the interest rate differs. At C, the interest rate is higher than at B. The demand for goods is lower than at B and there is an excess supply of goods. This implies that all points above and to the right of IS curve like C are the points of excess supply of goods and all the points below and to the left of the IS curve like D are points of excess demand for goods. Let us now summarize what we have learned in this module. First, goods market equilibrium is established where the planned spending is equals to the income. Second, the IS curve shows the different combinations of output and interest rate at which goods market clears or is in equilibrium. Third, in our goods market equilibrium, we use the aggregate expenditure model, but now investment is not autonomous, but it is determined by the interest rate prevailing in the market. Fourth, the IS curve is derived by joining all the points corresponding to the shift in the equilibrium points in the AEY plane when AE shifts as a result of change in the interest rate. Fifth, the condition of goods market equilibrium can be represented in the form of IS curve equation. Y is equals to A bar minus BI divided by 1 minus B into 1 minus T, or Y is equals to alpha G into A bar minus BI, where alpha G is equals to 1 divided by 1 minus B into 1 minus T. Sixth, whenever a change in autonomous spending like government expenditure or autonomous expenditure leads to a change in the equilibrium level of income, this increase is reflected as a shift of the IS curve at the same rate of interest. Seventh, the slope of IS curve is determined by the interest rate sensitivity of investment, that is given by B, and the size of multiplier. Eighth, all the points on the IS curve represents the point of goods market equilibrium, while all the points above or to the right of the IS curve are the points of excess supply of goods, and all the points below and to the left of IS curve are the points of excess demand for goods.